All right, here we are. Good evening, and thanks for asking me to talk to you about green infrastructure again. Some of you have probably heard me talk, so you're going to have to just handle and bear with me on the jokes that I repeat, no matter where I'm presenting, because they give you a visual cue on what I'm talking about a lot of times, and it makes you remember things. And of course, my jokes are hilarious. So I'm going to talk about stormwater management. And today of all days, embracing a water city is sort of what I'm talking about. So, and I like to start off like most landscape architects, way, way, way up in the air, and then I come down to where we're talking about somebody's street or front yard. So I always like to think about the regional watershed, and you have to think about where you are, and that's our Amite watershed there. I mapped this one for East Baton Rouge Parish that I have some slides on at the end, but everybody knows about all of our watersheds in the Lake Pontchartrain Basin, and be nice to people in Baton Rouge because they can pollute our water that ends up down here and ends up in Lake Pontchartrain. This is also to show us that I'm going to talk a lot about what happens on the South Shore, but I'll talk a little bit about the North Shore at the end if we have time. But the main thing I want to show here is that you could see the gray. The gray areas are, in a sense, basically impervious surfaces, not exclusively, but that gives you that sort of feel of the proportions of it. And also that we're pumping into Lake Pontchartrain at the same time that Tangipahoa River, Tchefuncte River, by Lacombe, everybody's draining into Lake Pontchartrain. So everybody's trying to, at the same time, that we're all having a storm, we're all trying to dump everything into this one water body, while at the same time, the entire basin is trying to drain into this one water body. And if there's a storm surge or even high tides, that in itself can be a problem, and we never seem to talk about that. But I like to think about that big picture as well. This also shows us and reminds us that we are a coastal city. And then this sort of gives you an even broader picture of the New Orleans, Jefferson, St. Bernard region, and how influenced we are by Lake Borgne and Lake Pontchartrain and the Gulf of Mexico and all of those other areas. It's pretty phenomenal when you think about it. So when you're on the streets of New Orleans, you're not aware of any of this. And I think part of that is something I'll hope to touch on about people's lack of awareness of where we are, lack of connectivity to water in most of the places where we live. So let's see, is there a way to make these little pictures of everybody go away? Do you know? Do you see those? Do you see everybody's picture?
You should. Okay, so if you hover, so you're seeing them on the right-hand side?
Yes.
Okay, you should hover towards the middle left-hand edge. You should see a little arrow, and you should be able to shrink it towards the right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you know what's my favorite word is should.
On my computer, it looks like
I
a
just
little thin
I
gray
just did that.
box that you click and it says hide thumbnail. I don't know if
Yeah, I just did that. That's good enough.
okay.
So anyway, this is a section through to remind us also of the kind of topography we have here. Lake Pontchartrain on the right, the river on the left. The river is higher. And then things like Gentilly Ridge, there's also Metairie Ridge, there's Pine Island Trend, and those all create different kinds of topographies and landscapes. And everybody knows if you're closer to the river, you're less likely to flood. But if you're closer to the lake, you might be more likely to flood, even though it's not quite that straightforward because of how we pipe and pump things. But you can also see this soil was most of this is filled in from the lake. It was wetlands. And then we even have little bands of sand in our soils here. But I'll sort of hopefully touch on that a little more. And then I wanted us to see, just remind us, we all know this, that we're one of the reasons we're in a bowl is because we've walled ourselves off with all of these levees. And so they protect us, but they cause other kinds of problems. And part of that is that disconnect, lack of awareness of water, difficult to get to water and to see water. And then we have our elaborate, just in New Orleans, sewage and water board drainage system. I forget, I took out a slide that showed me, I can't remember how many miles of pipe there are. And this is just showing the main pipes, and that's it. And these diamonds are pumps, pumping stations. So the interesting thing, except for a small exception, we pump everything from the river to the lake. Okay, that will come into play in a little bit. And then that's just another diagram of that. And you can see all the little pipes in the thin blue lines there. It's just an amazing piece of infrastructure. And then it also is not very handsome. I'm being polite. That is not, it's powerful. It's can be awe-inspiring, but it's not aspirational in any way. It doesn't make me, after I see this, feel rejuvenated in any way. It makes me feel like, wow, we spend all that much money on that kind of ugly looking stuff. Does it have to be that ugly? But then I'm a landscape architect. So that's the way and I didn't introduce myself. I am a landscape architect and a certified planner. I went to LSU, graduate school in landscape architecture, undergrad at LSU, graduate school, landscape architecture at Harvard. I've been doing this work for 41 years and I'm from New Orleans, born in the Upper Ninth Ward. So I just wanted you to see soil types. You can see some of those, like this yellow is like Pine Island Trendon, Gentilly Ridge, Mississippi, Metairie Ridge over here. But this is sort of muckier. And I'm going to show you another thing. It's muckier soil. And everybody always says all of our soil is clay, but that is actually not true. Just even on a regional standpoint. You can see even in this drawing here with the thickness of the peat layer. And the peat layer, because it's organic soils, right, has a great opportunity to subside. So our soils are clay, sand, and organic. We do have those little ridges or trends of sand. A lot of it is clay, but a lot of it is peat or organic material that when it is exposed to oxygen, it chemically reduces in size, not just physically. So clay soils is more like a sponge, right? It's your kitchen sink. You haven't been washing dishes lately and it dried out. Now you're gonna wash dishes and when you wet it again, it's gonna expand. Clay does that. Organic soils don't do that. They never expand again because it's not merely a physical, I'm sorry? Oh. Thought I heard some question or something. So anyway, so the organic soils decompose on a more permanent basis. And so that's permanent kinds of subsidence. And here you can see subsidence potential. And it was sort of dumbed down into these percentages on purpose by some of my Dutch friends, because when they had the actual number of feet that could be subsided, people were going to have heart attacks. So, but basically, you know, a lot of Metairie and Kenner can really subside a whole lot still. Okay. So that's just always trying to understand our landscape here. This is a stormwater model of a 10-year flood. And it shows where, and this over 2 feet, some places it's 6 feet. So once again, we sort of dumb things down sometimes because it's gonna, the public will see it and then they go nuts. But it's true, the dark blue is over 2 feet, in some places as much as 6 feet of water in a 10-year storm. That is based on the piping and pumping and canal system as it exists now in Jefferson and Orleans and St. Bernard, and that they are all functioning. And what I mean by that is that the pipes aren't broken or clogged. Catch basins aren't clogged because the model doesn't have a way of knowing that some pipes are broken or clogged, or that some pumps are off. So you get this much flooding, and you can see they talk about Broadmoor being the bowl, right? And this right here is the Pontchartrain Park in Gentilly Woods, and I'll talk about that more toward the end. There's City Park right there to orient you a little bit. But, and then that's the French Quarter, the Highland, no blue in there. So in a 10-year storm, we've been getting 10-year storms, several every year, and 500-year storms and 100-year storms. So I hope everybody does really understand it, that the changing precipitation intensities and frequencies it's just phenomenal how much it's changing. All of our models are still based upon what was mapped on an isopleth map about 60 or 80 years ago. I think it's more like 80 or 90 years ago. And so they're hopefully, NOAA I know they're looking at coming up with new maps that show you what a 10-year storm is in each area. Here, the first hour of a 10-year storm is about 3.5 inches of water, and 24 hours is about 9.5 inches of water, plus or minus. This morning, we had 4 inches of water in 1 hour, so it was greater than a 10-year storm. Just a little context, and I'll do this quickly, is, we had Mississippi River distributaries, and I'm sure there are other people presenting to you in a much better way than I would about this. Then we added the levees that ended the distributaries, I should say. And so I wanted to show you Bayou Bienvenue and what it used to be and a little history about it. So there's the healthy wetland triangle that was up there. And then we started to pump because they invented the wood pump, and the cypress swamps were drained, and they started to levee the Mississippi River, and the canals and other waterways were built that increases salinization. And there's our favorite, pardon?
I think we had somebody just joining in with us. We do have a question though in the chat. If I can stop you just for a second. Dana, I apologize. Of course, my dog was going to start jingle belling all over the place. So we have a question that says, can you explain historical reasons why we haven't implemented more pump to river, and whether or not that's even a good idea?
No, it's a really good question. We don't pump to the river because primarily it's higher. The river's higher, and then on top of that is the levee. So the cost of getting it up over to the higher ground and up over the levee is expensive, because the higher land is at the river, which is different than, say, the North Shore, right? The land along rivers there is the lower land, but here it's the higher land because of the sediment that used to be deposited along the river when it overflowed its banks. That higher land then naturally slopes towards the lake. So it would make sense in a lot of ways to drain to the river where it's closer, but you're still then pumping uphill and then over the levee as well. And so that's the main reason why. The Mississippi River has, since at least, 1927, has been thought of as the threat to us. And so it's very difficult to get any, to win in any kind of concept that involves penetrating that levee wall or levee. Or, does that make sense? Flood wall or levee? But that's why. It's it was natural drainage mostly, and then we started putting in the pumps. And the fear of the Mississippi River made us not want to touch that. Plus, Corps of Engineers is always fun to work with. Sorry if there's someone here who works there. Anyway, look at the green in Bayou Bienvenue and the central wetlands and how much they degraded. And then here you can see a series of pictures, 1933, 76, and 98. And it just, you could see it just disappeared at it's like we've got the receipts on what caused it. And that's that hydrological disconnection that I want to try to make a theme of some of what we're talking about today. And that freshwater supply loss meant we then started losing that natural sediment to the end of the Bird's Foot Delta and depositing all that great sediment into the Gulf instead. You can see it really well here. Yeah, and then the saltwater intrusion kills cypresses and a lot of the habitat there. So that happens when you're not flushing it with fresh water. Some of you might be scientists. I present these things in a very basic way, so I apologize if it's not as precise as you might like it to be. So after we do the presentation and questions and answers, you can then, on your own time, you can curse me out for that, for being too generalized, but it's the only way I know to present it. Then we remember 8th grade water cycle, right? The natural water cycle, where there's a lot of infiltration and not as much runoff, and there's evapotranspiration, et cetera. And then the urban water cycle, where we've put in so much impervious surfaces, there's a lot more runoff, a lot less infiltration of water into the ground, and it's also more polluted water. And then what we're trying to do with green infrastructure is mimic the natural water cycle as much as we can. In the bigger picture, that's what we're trying to do. And I like to remind everybody, the water that we have here on Earth, including what's in the clouds, is all the water there'll ever be. There's not more water coming from somewhere magically. And so when we pollute this water, we waste it and let it become salt water or brackish water, it becomes less viable for us to be able to use it for human purposes. So we need to be a lot more aware of, people don't know that if I took this whole screen and I said, that's all that represents all the water on Earth, I would probably take about a square half of an inch and say, that's the amount of fresh water that is available to us as humans to be able to use to live and fertilize crops and, unfortunately, operate industrial processes. We use fresh drinking water for that as well. So people are usually not aware of that. It's something to think about. So natural hydrology, I don't want to dwell on it, but you just have to think back to 8th grade. And there's a lot of evapotranspiration, but it's a cycle. That's the main thing. And the traditional one, instead of having these natural kinds of banks of rivers or bayous or anything, we have these canals that we concrete line, then we put up a fence, because the way we did the trapezoidal channel design, it's unsafe. If you fall in it, you probably can't get out and you're going to drown. So we have to put up a fence. And it's just like we keep doing things about drainage with blinders on. We're just trying to do, the only purpose of this canal, as it's designed right here, is just to hold water and move it as fast as possible. And we don't care about anything else. And that's a very myopic way of looking at our infrastructure, but that's how we've been doing it for a very long time. And you clear out vegetation, and they don't want any vegetation. That's going to slow the water down. And a lot of times it's like this concrete line and impermeable. Looks beautiful, like Monticello Canal, just beautiful kinds of infrastructure. That's my sarcasm, if you can't see my face. And no percolation in the ground, increases runoff even more. So the traditional approach, right? Same thing, even right at your house there. Get the water off your property, get it into an inlet and into a drain, and get it into that canal or some other kind of water body. So here's a couple of important things, and I'm going to get into one of them a little bit more deeply, is that with the kind of rainfall we have always had here in this region of the country, not to mention how the intensity is increased and the frequency is sort of very unpredictable, more drought, then lots of rain and lots of rain and lots of rain, then drought. We can't afford all the pipes and catch basins and pumps it would take for a traditional approach to be effective. We can't afford that. We've proven it because we can't even afford what we have now. And plus it's ugly, so we don't want to do that. The environments that it would create would be incredibly ugly. And again, I believe very much in a human's environment having so much to do with how they are able to function in the world, whether it's on a daily basis or in a bigger picture. I'm not going to get too philosophical on you, but we could have coffee another time, talk about it. But so words matter to me a great deal. Words matter. And engineers, and I've worked with engineers who totally get this and have changed their ways, but we've all are trying to change our ways because we all looked at it the same way. There's some ponding on my property. I want that water off of my property. Get it out of here. There's ponding, there's water getting up to my steps. And I always ask, well, is it in your house? No. Well, then why are you worried about it? There's going to be water. But what we've been doing is building structures to, quote, control stormwater. And somewhere along the way, at some point, we've got to remember, figure out, notice that we can't control anything in nature. And we're pretty audacious to think that we can. And that's why when I get into what I'm going to talk about more, stormwater management, that's why that word management is there, not control. The main thing about it is getting rid of the water, and they want to move water as quickly as possible from where it falls. What that does, and it's that myopic view of drainage only, we're just talking about drainage, what that does is shorten the time of concentration. Okay, so this is a very important thing for you to understand, in my opinion. So if you have, let's talk about the Lake Pontchartrain Basin. Say it's raining all the way from here to Baton Rouge. And Baton Rouge, somewhere in Baton Rouge is the point the farthest away from Lake Pontchartrain Basin. The time it takes that water, those drops of water that falls on that part of Baton Rouge to get all the way to Lake Pontchartrain is called the time of concentration, because if that drop of water is there, all the other drops are there. All the water that's closer and can get to the lake faster because they're closer, those drops of water are already there. So if that makes sense, you've shortened the time of concentration where you've concentrated all that water if you keep trying to push the water faster to get into whatever, to get into a catch basin, to get into a pipe, to get into a river, to get to Lake Pontchartrain. When you do that, you cause flooding because we're not thinking about where the water has to go. And so why is it flooding in certain parts of the city that are lower? Because you're trying to push all the higher water out faster. So that time of concentration is really critical. And what we try to do in green infrastructure or stormwater management is extend the time of concentration, stretch it out, make the water take its own time, sauntering down whatever pipe or canal or river that it's in, take its time to get there. And the reason is, I'm sorry? Oh, so, and the reason is if you can make that drop of water the farthest away take longer to get to that lowest point, then the water that is collecting at that low point first has a chance to drain away. Does that make sense? Somebody tell me whether that I'm being clear enough, because I talk with my hands a lot. Does that sound all right? Anybody, a volunteer gets...
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you, because I need to understand if I'm not making sense, because I like to see people's faces and then I know.
I remember last time I heard you talk, there was a difference between the retention and detention.
Yes.
Are you going to cover that?
Yes. And if I don't, you holler at me.
Okay.
Okay, great. Um,
I have a point that I like to make.
yes,
If I live in Lakeview
yes.
and if I put in something that would hold the water until it could take, um, that would make. I don't want to depend on the drains and the sewer or whatever.
Hmm.
I was thinking, and I've talked to other people, to putting something in the yard, and my best thought was like a septic tank that would, hold the water until it could go somewhere. Uh, is that viable? Does that make any sense? Is that, I kind of thought what you were saying makes that sound like it's something that works.
Well, when we do projects that are in really urban areas like downtown, we have to put everything in tanks underground. We have to put the stormwater underground. And then you have a pretty elaborate system that releases that water at the right time into the drainage system. So if you've got land, there's no reason to go underground because that is costly. And the problem with the tanks is that they don't get the water to infiltrate into the ground, right? They're holding it. But you're absolutely right. It's a great idea, but you didn't think about it first. Sorry, because you could have patented that. But no, we're doing that all the time in really urban areas. So I think I'll cover that more, but again, holler at me if I don't. So instead of moving water as quickly as possible from where it falls, we want to hold the water as close as we can to where it falls. So that's where we come into stormwater management, and I liken it to having children. If you have children, you really don't control them. You may think you do, but you don't. You really manage your life around them. Like, okay, he's got to go to Little League practice and I've got to bring her to ballet dances and I've got to do, you're just running around like crazy, trying to keep everything working properly. And that's what stormwater management is. It's more flexible. And hopefully that'll be clearer as we go along. But you want to use natural systems as much as possible. Maintain existing trees instead of doing what we typically do, particularly in suburban areas where we clear cut everything. And like we've got this blank canvas now. Yes, you've got a blank canvas where you totally destroyed the existing hydrology, and there was existing hydrology and the existing vegetation and the soils. And all three of those contribute to managing water better. You need to minimize impervious surfaces. There's no reason why, every time you look around, the standard, I'm exaggerating slightly here, the standards seem to change that says that the road lanes have to be wider. Somebody gets in an accident, so, oh no, oh my goodness, let's make the road lanes wider. And now we're using highway standards on local roads. The road width of, the lane width of 12 feet. I used to do a lot of transportation planning, that's why I know this. Comes from the highway capacity manual. And we just keep doing that because we keep making decisions myopically based on just one thing, which I must say, I don't even think that solves that problem, but I'm gonna let that part go. And you want to maintain drainage channels or man-made ones in a more of a natural state instead of an engineered state that's artificial. And you're really trying to create room for water as close to where it falls as possible. And that is the cheapest thing you can do and the most effective thing you can do. And when do those two things collide? I mean, come together? Rarely. Is the most effective thing also the most cost-effective thing? So here are just some of the things you know already. Here's some subsidence and the ugly infrastructure. And the reason why the subsidence occurs is not only because we're not putting the water back in the ground. A lot of times we pump too much and we keep pumping and we're actually sort of vacuuming the water out of the soil, and that's going to cause the subsidence. And the cost comparison to fix traditional drainage infrastructure is really incredibly expensive to build it, but also to repair it. One of the main reasons is you can't see what's going on. You can't even find the problem without digging up or putting in expensive cameras and finding out why this isn't draining. And then you got to dig up things to fix it. Right at this time, I usually do a small skit where I am a clogged pipe, but I can't do that online. So just imagine and laugh later. But because almost all the infrastructure is underground, it's invisible to us. And when it's invisible, then maintenance needs are invisible. And we all definitely know we neglect maintenance here. Not every place in the world neglects it as much as we do, but we have to also admit that we are a poor city. We do not have huge revenue sources from big corporations that have their headquarters here and all those kind of, we just don't have that kind of revenue, municipal revenue. So what gets neglected is generally what isn't seen. And so that just makes repairs even more expensive later. Stormwater management approach is less expensive to install. It's easy to expand, and that's really where my little skit comes into play. And the maintenance is visible. You can see at the bottom right, there's trash clogging up this bioretention cell, pick it up. And it's simple, but it really is simple. Okay. The other thing I mentioned, awareness and disconnect. We have these kind of flood walls around our canals, and you can be walking your dog there and you don't even know there's water there. You can't sense there's water there. Part of that disconnect, part of that lack of awareness, that invisibility also makes us not understand what's really going on with water in this city. Everybody's seen that slide, I'm sure. But the maintenance is constant and it's very expensive, and we just simply don't do it until there's a problem. And water pollution is a big issue. If you don't know, when it hasn't rained in a while, the streets and parking lots and rooftops have now collected a decent amount of pollutants on a road or a parking lot or even your driveway. It's gasoline and oil and brake fluids and pieces of tires and even metal engine blocks. I used to fix my own cars years ago, and you know, the gasket you had to replace the gasket and take it all apart and put a new gasket. Well, where'd the gasket go? Where'd the rubber go when the tires wore out? You know, where did all that stuff go? Where did the metal go when my engine block was really sort of deteriorating? Well, it didn't go to Mars, it went on the ground. And it may be microscopic, but it's there. And so it sits there and builds up until the rain comes. And that first flush of rain, we call it a first flush because it's flushing those pollutants off the surfaces of roofs and impervious surfaces of all kinds and collects all of that. And that ends up in Lake Pontchartrain unless we filter it first. And we don't, of course, with a sewage treatment system. That would be ridiculously expensive. But instead, we can do it with green infrastructure in a more cost-effective way. So the other three things I'd like you to really remember besides that, extending the time of concentration, which is mentioned in this slide, is the three things that the stormwater management strategy is doing is detaining water, and we'll talk about retaining it in a little while. It's temporarily storing the water as close as possible to where it falls. That gives the water time to infiltrate into the ground and recharge groundwater. It also gives a chance for soil microbes, plant roots, plants to filter the water and clean it. And very efficiently, very effectively remove pollutants out of that water. But it can't effectively do that if the water doesn't have what we call residence time. It doesn't have time to sort of sit there and be treated, have time to infiltrate into the ground. And so if you're detaining water, right? While it's being detained, some is infiltrated, some is filtered, some of that maybe even evaporates. So that actually, even when it is released into the pipe system, there's a whole lot less of it because some of it infiltrated into the ground. Some of it was taken up by plants. A mature cypress can take, and I've seen different studies, 2,600 gallons of water a day if the water is sent to it. Live oaks can take up even more, believe it or not, if the water is sent their way. But instead, we generally drain the water away from trees, say in a parking lot, and then we wonder why the trees don't do well. So what you're doing by detaining is you're increasing residence time, you're extending the time of concentration. You're holding some of that water back while the other water drains. So the analogy there that I like to use is the on-ramp on an I-10 when everybody gets off of work and it's backed up. And it's hard to get on the Claiborne overpass or the Claiborne Expressway. It's hard to get on, and they now have ramp meters at some of the ramps, and that's because everybody's trying to get on at one time. If people got off of work at 4:30 and then some at 4:45, and then some at 5 and 5:15, every 15 minutes or so, then that would not be the backup. It would flow better. Wouldn't be perfect, but it would flow better. It's the same kind of thing. It's like if you try to get the water away quickly, you've got a water traffic jam. And that's what causes flooding. We also have a phenomena here that is called back flooding, which doesn't occur in many places. And that means, say your block drained already, and now it's coming back out of the catch basin. And that's because the downstream areas couldn't drain, but water keeps getting put into that closed pipe system, and it backs up into your in your catch basin onto your street. If anybody was ever noticed on LaSalle Street by City Hall a number of years ago, there used to be this catch basin manhole cover that would blow when there was a heavy rain, and then we had a geyser shooting up at least a couple of stories into the air. And it took them forever to get a strategy to get that cover to stay there. I mean, they bolted it down, they welded it down. They finally figured it out. I don't know what they did. But that's the power of water when there's back flooding, when there's no place for it to go, but we keep pushing water into those pipes. It's a closed system. The other thing I want you to think about that is think about a pipe that once we say we're designing this drainage system and that pipe is 12 inches, 36 inches, doesn't matter. Whatever size it is, it can never hold more than that. It can't ever hold more than that because it's closed. Whereas stormwater management, green infrastructure is an open system, and I'll try to show you, I'll try to bring that home to you now. So green infrastructure mimics natural hydrology. It's detaining the water. So it's not trying to hold it permanently, but it doesn't mean it's releasing all that water back because some infiltrates into the ground. Plants and soil microbes, it's amazing how well they clean even heavy metals out of water. The great thing about it is it's applicable at any scale. We're doing some things in a parish, and I'm not going to mention the parish because I don't want somebody else to come in and take my work from me, but we're doing some big projects in a parish where it's big agricultural areas that, not agricultural areas, but areas that are just basically open land that we're going to bring water out of the river onto that land to just detain it for a while. So those are huge. And it's not like retention basins they do on the North Shore in St. Tammany Parish. I tend to find those to be too engineered. But you can do it at any scale, or you can do it at this scale right here, where there's a little French drain on the side and then a bioswale in the middle. And there are multiple benefits. This is the most important part about it compared to a traditional drainage approach. Besides recharging groundwater and therefore reducing soil subsidence, you're increasing urban habitat because you don't use anything but native or highly naturalized, or as the Louisiana, New Orleans Native Plant Initiative calls it, sometimes they call it nativars. You use plants that are natives, basically. And plants that are native are adapted here. They can deal with the drought. They can deal with a ton of water, and you've got to plant the right plant in the right place. But they also provide habitat and food for the wildlife that needs to be here. And we have to remember we're on the Mississippi Flyway, right? Green infrastructure reduces the urban heat island effect because there's more green. It cools the air. It literally cools the air, where concrete and asphalt heats the air. And the degree difference can be 10 and 12 degrees easily. We're working with, when I say we, Waterwise Gulf South is the nonprofit I work with and was a co-founder of. And if you've never heard of it, I would love for you to check us out. It's Waterwise Gulf South, all one word, .org. But we are working with some universities who are monitoring air temperatures in the neighborhoods where we're building green infrastructure. And we're working in Treme, 7th Ward and Upper 9th Ward right now, and have been for 5 years, putting in a lot of, and teaching people about green infrastructure. So we'll have some more data, real data as trees mature over a long period of time about how the urban heat island effect is reduced. And it increases the value of neighborhoods as well. There's other things it does. Air quality. Plants sequester carbon. It's better for community design and just community, just sense of community. You can build it incrementally. I can build a small rain garden and then next year I could go expand it. If you try to do that with a pipe, I just put in a 24-inch pipe, and the only way to expand that pipe is that you got to dig it up and put in a bigger pipe. And then, but what is that pipe connected to? And maybe now the next pipe can't handle it. So you'd have to dig up that pipe and put it in a bigger pipe too, because it's a closed system. What green infrastructure does, it doesn't replace gray infrastructure, which is what I call traditional. It takes the burden off of it. Okay, I'm going to show you. It reduces flood risk. Bioretention cells and bioswales. The bio is that it biologically retains pollutants. That's what the word bioretention cells comes from. And that's what I like to use. We call what we design bioretention cells. They always have an outlet back to a pipe system, whereas a rain garden in front of someone's house or backyard usually does not have a connection back because it's too difficult to and costly to connect back. If you're interested, there's a book called Biomimicry. The name is listed at the bottom. It's a bit of a hard read, but it's pretty cool to learn about how other things can be used. We can mimic other things in nature. Water quality, I've talked about that, the air pollution and sequestering. There's air pollution because look how clean the sky looks after these rains, right? This afternoon, if you looked outside, look how clear and beautiful it was. The rain washed pollution out of the air. Where did that go? Went on impervious surfaces and once again was flushed out. All right. Green space has multiple benefits, and we don't have enough green space in this city. We have a couple of really huge areas, but need more green space that isn't necessarily a park, or could be. That's a diagram of the urban heat island effect, where green space and plants reduce the air temperature compared to an urban area. So let's talk about some types of green infrastructure. I mentioned rain gardens. It's basically, if you want to know where to put a rain garden in your yard, go look at where the water collects and just put it there and dig it deeper and put some sandy soil with a little bit of compost and plant native plants. A bioswale is just like that, but it's linear. So it's actually used to convey water from one area to another, like a pipe, but it's an open system, right? I'm not the biggest fan of detention basins, but I've designed them because they tend to just be grass that gets mowed. And grass doesn't do for water quality or groundwater infiltration that native plants do. Here on the left is a stormwater planter. I'll show you some French drains, rain barrels. This is pervious paving on the right. That's at my house. I had massive quantities of it put in, and infiltration columns, and then trees. So when we talk about plants, we need to think of whether it's a rain garden or a bioswale, bioretention cell, that the lower part where it's going to stay wet more is like a lower riparian area where you need to pick plants that like that. And there's like a middle riparian area and an upper one that might get their feet wet briefly, and it could handle that. And this example of this rendering is like mealy grass, but it's not going to want to sit in water. So native plants also send their roots a lot deeper. And so let's go back to our soils, right? We have clay soils here. Everybody says it's all clay soils, and they do infiltration tests. We have to do infiltration tests before our projects are designed. But that infiltration test of how quickly water goes into the ground is at one point in time. It's a static point in time. When we plant, and my office is doing a lot of tests and monitoring on this right now, but when you plant native plants, their roots get deep right through that clay soil. They pipe through it with their roots, which brings air and water into the soil, and it fundamentally changes the characteristics of that soil. It also brings with it and attracts microbes. And so now you have a higher infiltration rate. I can't seem to get people to understand that one, but I'm going to prove it one day, and with data, but that's what's happening. So, and it's true. If you've ever wanted to remove a plant from your yard, how deep did you have to dig to get that thing out of the ground? I know I've done that for myself and helped friends with it. And boy, I tell you what, the roots get really deep. Well, how do they do that if it's all clay? And it is clay, a lot of it. So that's in my house, that rain garden. What I want to point out to you is along the side of the house where the downspouts are is a French drain. It has a pervious pipe in the bottom, toward the bottom of it, and that bends and comes into and dumps into this rain garden. And so I'm getting the water off the roof and putting it in the rain garden, and then other water flows into the rain garden as well, right? Native plants, and that's a red swamp maple, my favorite tree in all the world. There it is again on the right. Here's a different one on the left. This is a bioswale. Remember I said it's linear. These, this one on the left in the back, those are in the native palmetto. And we built this 5 years ago. Those native palmettos are huge now. They are so happy. The house on the left was draining onto the property on the right, such that the driveway was full of water, and they couldn't get out of their car without getting their feet wet. So we put this in, and they've never had that problem again. You could put bioswales in a parking lot like that. And I'll skip a few things. This is a giant bioretention cell in the parking lot at City Park, where the old tennis courts used to be, behind the museum. And that's what that looks like usually. It's a lot of maintenance. We get in there and help maintain it. That's it. These stormwater lots we've done for the Redevelopment Authority are actually mostly retention basins, but we do plant them to some degree. And we're actually taking water off the street. You can see that runnel there is taking water off the street. You can see the water going into the lot. In another project I'm going to show you in just a second, we not only take it off the surface of the street, we take it out of the pipe that's in the street and bring it into the lot and detain it. So that's what it looks like when it's not full of water. I think this is my video. Yeah, it fills up. Stormwater planters, they could be any kind you want. Where you have, it's narrow spaces and you can't really fit something in the ground or can't remove the concrete. That's a French drain right there being built on the left and one installed on the right. And it's coarse rocks. I always put a 4-inch diameter pervious pipe in the bottom of it to help with storage and to help carry the water. You don't have to. And that usually that dumps into a bioretention cell or a rain garden, or it connects back into the drainage system. You can get really big rain barrels and cisterns. Deep paving is a really important thing to do. This is something we did at the Autocrat in the 7th Ward, where we took out some concrete and planted because the water was draining from left to right. And so we're at least catching some of it before it goes right into the street. Pervious paving, I showed you that. This is a type that you've probably not seen, but people like this one because it's, you know, not everybody wants bricks or pavers. So I like this one that's sort of cobbly looking. I'm going to skip this because it's complicated to explain. Planting trees. Very important if you plant trees correctly. And you plant them and give a lot of space on the side. So you could see where this concrete was removed, where somebody is digging, and it's not just a little hole, it's a wider hole. And then what we're trying to get the city to do, and we're doing more of it, is putting in these tree cells, which are like big structural egg crates on the sides of the trees that keep the soil from ever compacting around the tree so that the roots can grow and survive, and it can get water and air to the trees. So there's a tree cell module. There's one getting installed. Sorry, right there on the right. They can be big, you can stack them, but they hold a lot of water. They're sort of like that septic tank you're thinking of putting underneath the ground in your yard. A constructed wetland is green infrastructure. This was one at City Park. People say, yeah, but it's got some ugly color water in there. Yes, because it's draining the water off the soccer fields, and there's all kinds of things on there, maybe some fertilizer, probably some daiquiris, and it all gets washed off into here, and this cleans it before it gets into Lake Pontchartrain. Let me see, what else can I show you? The neighborhood approach, I think, is what's great about green infrastructure. It can be distributed. I'm gonna skip all this ecological services metrics that we've done over the years, but I wanna show you these projects. Can you guys see my mouse? I hope so. That's that Pontchartrain Park Gentilly Woods area. That is under construction right now. It's $15 million of green infrastructure. This is the Gentilly Resilience District, and this is Broadmoor. So I'm gonna talk about Broadmoor and Pontchartrain, Pontilly just briefly. And the key thing about it is that there's what it looks like on the left. Suno is on the top left, and then if you keep going north toward the lake, there's the lake, and UNO. So these are dark blue, 6 inches, 6 feet, sometimes 3 feet, 4 feet of water in these areas. And what we did was we proposed, instead of digging some big thing and putting a bunch of water in a big retention basin, we proposed this distributed green infrastructure system of stormwater lots, like the one I showed you in the video, plus pervious paving on the downslope side of streets, just for parking, pervious paving for parallel parking. That's hard to say. And that holds a lot of water underneath it because there's a lot of number 57 limestone or even coarser, and it has about a 35 to 40% void rate. So 1 cubic foot of it holds 4/10 of a cubic foot of water. And so we're storing water there. This is a giant bioswale along the south side of the golf course. That is excavated, and when you're there, it just looks like it goes on forever. If you get a chance to go drive over here on, say, Stephen Girard or around the golf course, look and see what's going on. It should be finished later this year, the whole project. But a distributed green infrastructure system is they could come back next year and find more money and put in a few more green infrastructure. Whereas, like I mentioned before, you can't do that with a pipe system that's closed. So we have corner basins like this, where the water comes down the curb and gutter that exists. We block the catch basin that's in here. The water comes and sits in this bioretention cell. There's a standpipe and it drains back into that catch basin after the water gets high enough. And so it's detaining the water. You can see sort of what it looks like over here as well and how the water can flow. I could talk about these all day, but I can't, right? Stormwater lot, I showed you that already. There's the big bioswale. And that's what it looked like before they did excavation. This was a rendering. I need to put in here the picture of what it looked just excavated. So what I wanted to show you here is before and after, left and right, with just those distributed green infrastructure systems modeled. That's the difference in standing water. That's a big difference. We're doing the same in, the project was called Broadmoor. It's now called Drainage Pump Station 01 because it wanted a sexier name. But actually the whole project's in Central City, so the Broadmoor name made no sense. But anyway, it's a distributed system just like in Pontchartrain, in Pontilly, and you can see the reduction. It actually reduces flooding in Central City and in Broadmoor. So, and that's the distributed system there. And some of the same types of things. And I'm not going to go anymore because I know we want some questions. I have a little more to show you, but I think that's probably enough for today. And I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Dana. I love that presentation. We did have one question in particular, actually, that kind of comes off of the stormwater planner that you were talking about just a few minutes ago. Somebody asked if it captures roof water at all.
Yes, at the point I took the picture, we did not have the downspout connected to it yet. But that's what the intent is. That's at, and all of you who know where this is, you're going to be giving yourself away. That's at Bullets Bar in the 7th Ward. But the downspout is over here, and it's going to be, it has been connected to this. And you can see these little weep holes at the top here. In the 7th Ward in Treme and Upper Ninth, we've, when I say we, this is Waterwise Gulf South, we've hired local artists, and they've painted some, this one on the right has been totally redone. Why does it do that to me? I don't know where I am now. Went too far. It's been totally redone, so it doesn't look like that anymore. There we are. But we have these artists paint cultural images of those neighborhoods on rain barrels and stormwater planters, and they're going to do signs for us. And the one on this, where it says Waterwise, that one got rebuilt, and the rendering on that, the painting on it is just amazing. It's just beautiful. So we're trying to tie our local culture into everything we're doing.
That's awesome. We have another really good question kind of building on top of these beautiful stormwater planters. What are some of the best plants for a rain garden?
Well,
besides native, of course.
Native plants. Well, I mean, your problem's going to be is what can you get? And when we do projects, design projects that are going to go out to bid, right, we can get a contractor to contract bid for a large number of a certain type of plant, whereas you can't do that. So if you can go to any of the places on North Shore or Pelican Greenhouse with City Park, there are a couple others that are right here in New Orleans that focus on native plants. And I'm sorry, I can't remember them off the top of my head. Pelican is the one I always remember. But it, you know, this is going to be obnoxious, but there is this book called Using Native Plants for Green Infrastructure, and the author is me, so you could get that.
Love it.
And I get about $1 now off of each copy, so I'm certainly not selling it for money. The first 900 copies, I got 18 cents a copy. Now I get $1.15. Yeah, but anyway, I have a lot of them, and you know, when are you guys finishing this Master Gardeners thing?
So this is just part of our Master Naturalist continuing education.
That's
right
what I
now.
meant.
Yeah, this is just part of our like continuing education, since we were during the stay-at-home order is lifted, but during COVID times.
How many people are in the so it's just a refresher, it's not a class?
Yes.
People, okay.
Yeah, so this is just kind of like some members that have been certified for a while, some newer members, and we have looks like we've got about 50 people in the presentation this evening.
Okay. I mean, I'd like to figure out a way. I've got a couple of boxes of my books I'd be happy to just give you guys. So maybe we could talk later about how to do that. I mean, you're happy to have some, like I say, $1 isn't going to do it for me. However, if you take a book and I'm ever starving, I'm going to call you and ask you to take me to lunch. But no, I'm happy to do that. I might have 50 or close to it. But yeah, but that's that book. It has the native plants, and I'm redoing it right now. Okay. It'll have a lot more information, and whether it's a book or just online or whatever, I don't know yet. But it tells you like what level it should be planted at. And it even gives you plant communities, so that you try to plant the plants together that like to be together, which also then makes it look right, because it looks more natural. Part of our biggest problem with native plants is that people are very used to manicured lawns and clipped hedges, and they think everything should look like it got controlled. And native plants just don't do that. And so we need to change our sort of aesthetic view of plants.
Dana, do you have a field application for your presentation?
Do I have a what now?
Do you have something that we can do to go out and investigate green infrastructure to get our members outside?
No, I don't, but I'm pulling out my pen and paper. I love that idea.
Okay.
I love that idea of giving them, I've got a pretty good GIS database of where, not just ours even, but where a lot of them are. And then there could be things to evaluate, like you're thinking of. Is that what you're thinking of? Or
yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. So like individually, I could drive out to this Pontilli golf course on Prentice. What was the drive that you were saying? Prentice Drive, and just evaluate before and after a rain.
You know, and then that data, we could put that in the GIS database I have and start to understand, like, here's a picture in 2020 or 2020, and here's a picture in, 2020, 2000, spit it out, 2025. And,
yeah.
And then even if people would go out and take pictures or video like the one I showed while something is functioning, that's great too. I love that idea. I'm going to see if I can get one of my staff to jump on that.
Dana, can you hear me?
Yes.
How sympathetic is code enforcement on the depaving of sidewalks and driveways to install pervious? And what are the steps a landowner should take to initiate that process?
Well, the driveway that is on your property from the back of the sidewalk to your house, right?
Correct.
You can do that with a permit. they're not, they have gone back and forth with us about allowing us to take out that part of the sidewalk and the apron, which is the part that connects from the sidewalk to the street. As of 2 days ago, they were back to letting us do it. And I'm really not being sarcastic. This is just how it depends on who you talk to. We're trying to get them to, make a decision on that, stick to it. But you have to get a permit. So you go through permits for that. The sidewalk, what they don't like to let you put impervious pavers in sidewalks. And I'll tell you the irrational reason. Because they might have to come and dig it up and put in new utilities or fix something, and they're just going to pour concrete. And my argument is that, but if it's pervious pavers, you just pick up the pavers. You just pick them up and put them on the side. Do your work, and then put some limestone back and put them back. But they won't do that. They want to do it the way they've always done it. So I think we should all keep trying to do that. And also pervious paving has maintenance. So does impervious paving have maintenance, believe it or not. Drive on a street and tell me it doesn't. But you have to either vacuum it out or wash it out so that depending on how many trees, plants that they shed, how much dust, is there dust in some kind of a lot nearby, all those kind of things affect mine. I just take a very powerful hose and wash it out. That's all I do. But they're also worried about who's going to maintain it. Well, you're required to maintain in front of a residence, I think commercial too, all the way up to the curb. So if if we could get them to let us sign things that say we'll maintain it, it's not easy yet, but it's getting better. Did you see the ordinance that was recently passed unanimously?
I did. I did.
That was Waterwise Gulf South. Our neighborhood champions went and met with every council member. We didn't write the ordinance. That's what they wanted to do. Our neighborhood champions, they went and said, we want you to require that public projects have to have pervious paving. So
why does code enforcement still give you a hard time if they have an ordinance on public places?
It's not code enforcement, it's permits. It's getting the permit in the first place. Now, I did not say, is this being recorded?
No, I'm not.
If this is being recorded, you might want to erase this part later. You could do it and ask for forgiveness later.
Okay.
So that's up to you.
Thank you.
If they want to come at you, they could make you take it out, but that would be pretty dumb on their part, of them making you take out something that is fulfilling what the city has said their entire goal is. Yeah, we build, I've lost track. Over the last 5 years, 5.5 years, I don't know, several $100,000 worth of green infrastructure and done a lot of training. And they give us a hard time every time.
Okay, thank you.
But we're working on it. We're working on it with them. Okay, anything else?
Let's see, I'm looking. We have one asking about maybe briefly explaining how the underground collection pipe that redirects the water, how that works.
In a bioswale, or is that what you're talking about?
I believe so, because it looks like they're building off of kind of like the things you can do at home kind of questions.
Yeah, right. Well, you're really not going to be able to connect back to the catch basin, because if you did that, you'd have to have permission to tear up the sidewalk, permission to modify the catch basin, because then you'd have to make a hole in the back of it, putting your pipe into it. And so here's what I recommend. If you put a rain garden in the back of your yard, have it connect to a French drain that drains toward the front of your yard, because almost all the lots, not all, in New Orleans anyway, and in Jefferson Parish, drain from back to front. So if you have a rain garden that fills up a lot of stuff back there, take a French drain and have it bring that water to the front. You could put it in another smaller rain garden in the front. And all that's going to happen without a connection to that catch basin is that rain garden will just overflow, go over the sidewalk, and go into the catch basin. So it doesn't have to be as complicated as a big commercial project would have to be. Because if the rain garden in the back or the front and the French drain weren't there, there'd be a whole lot more water flooding the sidewalk, right? So you're still doing a lot of great things for managing water here. But just let it get a little high and overflow and go over the sidewalk and into the street.
Gotcha. Yeah, and there's actually another question kind of, building on top of that as well, like with the pervious paving. Do you know of any local companies that do that?
Put in pervious paving?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's several good landscape contractors we work with. Green Man Dan does it. He's great. RCI, they're bigger. They do it. Probably Twin Shores does it. They're bigger, but those are the ones that we work with typically. If somebody asks me, I work with Dan, Green Man Dan, all the time. Yeah. I offer another plug here. I offer the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program once or twice a year. It's usually once because people don't want to take a class in the fall because of football. So I've never had enough people sign up in the fall. So, but I just finished one in April, and it's 6 Saturdays in a row though. It's intense. It's serious learning, but you can learn how they're built and how to maintain them and inspect them. And you can be, if you take the exam after and pass that, you're nationally certified. I am the only licensed trainer in the state, and it's with the Water Environment Federation, WEF. So if anybody's ever interested in that, send me an email, and we'll put you on the list for next time and let you know. And if you want to do it, great. If you don't, that's fine too.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually,
NGICP.
And I'll get with you too at the end of this, and I'll shoot you an email, and I'll just kind of remind you that, maybe we could just get like a list of some of the really awesome resources that we talked about, and then I could send those out to everybody. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I could get you some resources for some of the materials if you do a lot of this yourself. Water-wise, we do almost everything with volunteers except excavation of large amount of soil and then building like this concrete planter. We get a local concrete guy to build it, but we do it all ourselves. We even put in pervious pavers, which, your knees won't feel good after, but, So I can give you a list of where to get materials.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. I may even, guys, if y'all have any other questions, feel free to shoot me an email. And Dana, I'll probably email you tomorrow because I might have some questions to add there. And yeah, this was great. Thank you so much.
I'm going to end it with your high school test, SAT test that was multiple choice. And the item E was all of the above. And that's what we have to do to take care of flooding problems in this city. We have to do all the above. Every place we can do green infrastructure, we have to do it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'll send out an email with resources and all that good stuff, probably in the next couple of days. So thanks for joining y'all, and don't forget to submit those hours on Track It Forward. Guys. All right, thanks.